honored to be here. I'm honored to be an alumni of SagradoCorazon. It's kind of funny because some of my college professors are here and a lot of friends, and I'm thinking, no pressure, but I should do something to prove that their efforts were worthwhile. So I'm going to try to tell a story. Like many TED presentations, I hope to tell a story of finding solutions to complex global problems in unexpected places, and in the way, maybe exploring a little bit of the beauty of life, which is what I enjoy so much about the TED Talks. My presentation is really a compilation of the work by many of my colleagues at the Yale Child Studies Center, my colleagues at the St. Louis Zoo, my colleagues at the Consultative Group for Child Care and Development, and UNICEF. And it could be said that the goal of this presentation is to make a call to the United Nations as they're working on their post-2015 agenda to consider young children and early childhood development policy as a keystone, as a cornerstone of policy building for sustainability. It could be said, but in reality, what I'm going to do is tell a story to my two sons, Arcadio and Tadeo. I travel a lot, and I spend a lot of time away from them. And this is an opportunity to explain to them why and why it's important. So this story begins with this globe, because when we think about sustainability, this is actually one of the iconic images that NASA took of the Earth. It begins with that image of the Earth as seen from the moon. And it's this idea of sustainability as this huge global process that has to do with so many things. And over 20 years, when I began my work on conservation and sustainability, this is how I saw sustainability. As things progressed and I got more into it, one of the things that happened that was kind of interesting, that thing about unexpected places, is that it started looking like this. So I'm going to try to somehow explain how young children, babies, are the keystone to building sustainability in the world. But before I do that, I want to tell you first just a little bit about how we think about sustainability. The beginning of thinking about sustainability came about because species started disappearing. Somebody noticed that there were fewer whales, or that elephants were starting to disappear. They were plentiful, and all of a sudden, they couldn't find elephants, or elephants were dying left and right. Same with gorillas, many plant species. So we became aware of that, and a lot of biologists that were in the field doing what Darwin did 100 years ago, a little bit more, they started noticing that those animals that they were just studying for questions that had to do with their biology and how they worked and who they were, et cetera, were starting to disappear. So they started putting their attention on what can we do to make sure that these beautiful animals and plants are always there. And in the process of thinking about that, they realized that all of those things are connected to this biosphere, these ecosystems, that no organism is independent, that things that are happening all around the biosphere are affecting the organisms, and the things we do that affect these organisms affect the biosphere. So a new piece to the puzzle. But soon, right after that, we realized that many of the things that were happening in terms of the reduction of biodiversity and species had to do with things humans were doing to put pressure on the planet. The way we got our energy, the way we consume, the things we consume, the way we build cities, the ways we manage our waste, the ways we transported ourselves. So many results from the processes that we use to produce stuff. More recently, fundamental changes in the characteristics of the atmosphere, pressures that we're putting on the planet. But in thinking about sustainability, soon after that, we realized that there's more to that in that picture, that all of those things are informed by the way we learn, by the kinds of health programs that we have, by how we access water, how the economy works, what kind of jobs do we have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These things that are, how do we treat each other as humans that affect the way that we impact the planet, that finally affect biodiversity in the planet and the sustainability that keeps other species and ourselves alive. More recently, it was very pleasant to see how this is moving to more philosophical and more existential questions. And now we're not just thinking about these concrete things of life, water, food, education. We're also thinking about empowerment. We're also thinking about peace and conflict. We're also thinking about people that are moving from place to place because the places they used to live in are not acceptable anymore, whether it is because of conflict or it is because of conflict related to biodiversity, the global trade process, etc. So it looks like a lot, doesn't it? It becomes like a process of trying to grab sand. It's like the babies before. It falls from your hands. It's really hard to get a handle on this. And so while the good news is that we have a more complex, nuanced picture of what sustainability is about, we are also faced with a much more complex world. And how do we get a handle on it so that we can push for sustainability? Well, sort of by accident, I got into the question of what is the role of nature in early childhood development. And in doing that, and in collaboration with the policy group at the Child Studies Center at Yale, this ended up happening. We noticed that this wasn't just an exception. Young children are connected in key ways with all of these elements of sustainability. For instance, pollution and what we do to the planet affects children tremendously. They are like the proverbial canary in the coal mine. When they are experiencing environmental degradation and chemical pollution, it doesn't just make them sick. It fundamentally changes who they're going to be for the rest of their lives, because some of those chemicals, like heavy metals, will have a neurological effect that is really difficult to reverse. More recently, with the issue of climate change, it is also, and carbon, it is also presenting a situation in which young children are being displaced and the lives of their communities and their families are changing fundamentally. So they are in the middle of all of that. And think of children and realize that in a weak community, in a weak family, the young children are the weakest link in that process. So whatever will affect a community and a family a lot will affect a child a whole lot. Thinking again about climate change, we have good news. So this is bad news and good news. And one of the good news is that interventions that we do at the moment where children are young, and here I guess I should point out that when I'm talking about early childhood development, I'm talking about that period between what we call 0 or conception and around 9 years of age. And you have to understand that we're talking about a fundamentally significant and different moment in life. The way that I usually describe it to people who are not developmental scientists is that an 8-month-old is as different to an 8-year-old as they are to an 80-year-old. This is a very significant moment in life that has many repercussions. So let's think about young children that have been displaced from where they used to live because of issues of climate change or biodiversity loss or conflict. That tent right there. Interventions in those camps have the potential effect of reducing this or eliminating the cycle that makes these communities have to move again and again and again, and makes these children much more resilient. So whatever needs to be done, they will be more able to accommodate to. Of course, there's economic development and employment, and interventions in early childhood development have been proven to have the effect of making people more employable. The more capable, the healthier you are, the more you can contribute to the economy. Another piece of good news is that It has been studied widely, and we're currently looking at that in even more detail, but the return on investment when you spend $1 on a child that is around 3 years old or younger is between $7 and $14 for that $1 you spend. Once that child reaches 8 years of age, or around that time, it all becomes cost. The amount of resources and money that are necessary to make up for all of those services that were not provided before one, turn what would be a return of $7 to $14 into costs, and just a hole that you will only keep putting money to. So these interventions also generate money for the economy. Health interventions, simple interventions like vaccinations on young children fundamentally change their lives. Not only do they assure that they will not die of a disease, but think of polio and how many children survive polio and the consequences of not being vaccinated and being handicapped for life by a disease that is perfectly preventable. Efforts right now to find a vaccine for diseases like malaria are key in trying to promote health practices that will allow children to live to their full potential. Education, early stimulation, and this is the part that most people are familiar with, has a key role in creating a situation where children can get to school more ready and make the most out of school. And in many countries, it makes the difference between children staying in school and dropping out of school in the first few years of school. In fact, the technical definition of early childhood development talks about the moment of appropriate or final transition to formal schooling. So it's not an age, but it's that moment when a young child becomes somebody who is now part of the formal education system in a good way. This issue is also connected to empowerment of women, which is one of the key issues under discussion at the United Nations for the Agenda of Sustainability. And empowerment of women from the perspective of early childhood development means providing young girls and young baby girls with the same opportunities as boys so that when they are faced with the same challenges or educational alternatives, they can take them on fully and join the economy in a full way and have access to property and have education that can keep moving us towards equality and equity in terms of development for all. So this should be pointed out as a key aspect, not only because of that, but because empowerment of women on the other side of this means that women that now have access to employment and have access to education in many countries, if they are provided with appropriate early child care alternatives when they go to work, they are also breaking a cycle of poverty because now their children will be given opportunities that will make them thrive even more than their mothers. And it also seems to have a demographic effect of changing the trend in population without having to make rules. Women that are employed, that have joined the economy, that are educated, families that are educated and have joined the economy in an appropriate way, are families that tend to have less children. This has been seen all over the world. Conflict. I was just recently at the UN at a beautiful meeting where we were discussing the relationship between conflict and early childhood development. And you think, yeah, well, if you're nice to kids, they'll be nice people, etc. But we're also talking about the epigenetics of peace. Decades of research have now shown that there is a fundamental transformation in the epigenetics of children, in the genetic code of children, when they experience violence and aggression and maltreatment, that changes the way they are going to be pretty much for the rest of their lives. If children are developing in those settings, they will tend to respond to stress in a worse way. They will tend to interpret things as aggression more quickly, and they will tend to respond aggressively more quickly over their whole life. So this is not just a small thing. Interventions in early childhood development can change the trend in world peace. And of course, my field of study, which has to do with early childhood development and the connection to nature, on one end of it, we have found that children that develop in healthy ecosystems in impoverished countries have a higher likelihood to be healthy and more cognitively developed, and we're actively working on trying to figure out what that means. But on the other side of it, and this is one of the beauties of early childhood development as a platform for policy, in developed countries, early childhood development is that moment where you can see the consequences of affluence and overconsumption. And so childhood obesity and many things that are related to learning disabilities are now starting to be connected with the relationship between children and appropriate nature or healthy nature. As you can see here, children, young children, are connected in many significant ways, not only with understanding the issues of sustainability, but also with understanding how to move forward and producing policy prescriptions that will allow us to fix, to create a more sustainable world, a world of peace, a world of dignity, a world of equity, which is what brings us to the asterisk. So here's the thing. Every child that's born is a promise. They are born with the promise that they will fix the economy. They will work towards making society better. They will save the planet. They promise that, every one of them, when they're born. But it doesn't work. It's not for them to decide. At the beginning of their lives, and this is a really important point I want to make, what I'm trying to do here is not try to convince you that we leave this problem to the children. At the beginning of their life, they need us. They need adults. They need institutions. They need national governments. And they need the international government to make the appropriate policy prescriptions, to make the appropriate programs, so that all of these children can reach their full potential. And that's it. Thank you.